So, Mr. Baker, you highlighted the story of your grandmother. What was your experience pharmacy shopping? How many pharmacies did you visit? Did you find that they had the same drug from the same company? Was there diversity in manufacturers?
Yeah, I come from a pretty small town in Oregon called Lebanon, and there's about 3 pharmacies in the area, and so we went to all 3, and each one actually had the same product by the same manufacturer. So we reluctantly made that choice, and I felt bad because already then at the first pharmacy I already sort of hinted that this was not going to go well, and so it's an experience that's going to stay with me for the rest of my life. Because it shouldn't be like that. I think we can do better.
How'd you feel buying a drug from a company that just settled with the DOJ for faking lab data?
Yeah, it was a tough decision. And again, as I mentioned, trying to stay positive is the one thing, because you don't want to cause unnecessary panic in someone. And a lot of people ask me before they'll take it. Like, they'll give me a call or send me an email like, "Hey, what do you think about this one?" And I'll give them advice. And to be honest, over the years, sometimes I have to fake that advice because I know there's no alternative, and I'll have to just send a positive email when, in fact, inside I know that that's not the truth.
How do you do it when you buy drugs for yourself?
For myself, I would do the same thing. I live now in Austin, so I have more choices there, and try to do my best to shop around, or even consider like an online pharmacy if I can call them and find out where, what manufacturer they're going to use to fill that prescription.
So do you believe Americans are dying because of poor oversight done at foreign generic drug manufacturing facilities?
Not poor oversight, but
no
poor
oversight,
but poor enforcement. But again, it's complicated to enforce because of the drug shortage issue. So it's no one person or one organization's fault. It's the system.
So why did the FDA set up this foreign surveillance system the way they did?
It was a collaboration with Embassy and FDA and folks at HHS to sort of evaluate, to tell the story, what we were finding in our initial times when those foreign, you mentioned heparin earlier, that was the reason, one of the reasons, but I think the main one why the foreign offices were established in strategic locations around the world was to be that sort of rapid response and gain further insight into what's happening with our supply chain. And I think, 15 years later, the picture is pretty clear.
So, Dr. Ball, so what causes, if they're all FDA approved, what are some of the things that causes one to be different than the other one?
So I think the notion that if it has the same active pharmaceutical ingredient, dosage form, and route of administration, which is kind of what a generic equates to an original, if you match those, the drug will work. That discounts all of the manufacturing influence on quality. And so these are subtle changes, and my intuition is that they're often not on purpose. If I was in a market where I was only competing on cost, I would find the very cheapest place to make my product, the cheapest labor, the cheapest equipment, the cheapest suppliers. It's the rational thing to do. So when Peter says it's the system, it truly is, because I believe these manufacturers are acting very rationally. If you cannot judge quality and it is opaque, cost is the only thing that matters, that will inevitably reduce quality. It actually must. It's like a scientific fact. If you cut the corner in every part of making a product, if quality doesn't suffer, something's wrong. You haven't cut corners enough. So quality will suffer eventually. It's in every part of the supply chain.
Right. Mr. Baker, when you did a foreign site inspection, did the FDA or the foreign facility pay for your translator? And is that a problem either way?
Yeah, so in my experience, most of the translation is provided by the sales department within that company, who oftentimes has the best English because of their job. They don't know much about manufacturing, but they know they're supposed to tell the story well. So that's oftentimes what I experienced. Luckily for me, I had studied Mandarin for about 15 years prior to going to China, so I could sort of overcome those challenges. But yeah, that's the norm. Not always. Sometimes they'll provide an independent translator, but it's voluntary.
Mr. Baker, when you went to China, do they let you just go anywhere you want?
Yes.
You could go, but the government would let you go anywhere, and you could walk into any facility, and you could walk around any facility you wanted?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we had a very good working relationship with, they were called CFDA at that time.
Okay.
And they would shadow us on a lot of our inspections to learn our techniques,
Why would they shadow you?
to learn how we uncovered the issues that we were finding, using like forensic computer inspection techniques, things like that.
So give me an example of a facility that you were most disappointed?
Most disappointed, I think, are the ones where there's multiple, but you would show up at the show. I mentioned this in the 5-minute testimony where you would show up at the show facility. This is the clean one, but we knew, like, showing up, you knew that there's no way they're making the amount of products that I can see on the customs import list, right? So there's no way. And so what you'll do is you'll try to find, you'll show up at midnight and just watch operations, from the outside, try to find out what's going on, and then you'll eventually uncover like a shadow facility. It can be like next door, or it can be somewhere else. You'll watch trucks come in, right? And when you find that shadow facility, that's, I think, one of the most concerning things, because those are totally off the radar. There's, I mentioned the problems with unannounced inspections, but just exponentially worse when you don't do any inspections there. And so and I think when we were there, we probably figured that 10% of the API getting exported to the US was from shadow facilities. That was just, I have no data to support that. That was just a rough number that we sort of came up with. And compounding pharmacies are really suffering as a result of this, because they're importing products and they really don't have any ability to determine where they're coming from.
How long could a facility that was doing the wrong thing stay in business before they're shut down?
A long time, especially if they had any drug that was on the shortage list. And so you could prevent some of their products from reaching the U.S., but they'd continue to ship a couple we called them carve-outs, right? Because we just couldn't prevent the supply. And then they'll ask for reinspection in about 1 to 2 years. FDA will go back, and oftentimes that will be unannounced because it's resource intensive to do unannounced all the time. And then that would be a choreographed inspection, and the clock resets. So they can hang on for years because we are addicted to these sites.
Okay. Dr. Ball, you reviewed adverse event data that the FDA had and cross-referenced that to drugs made in India, right?
Correct.
Okay, where does the adverse event data come from? And what did you consider to be an adverse event? And what conditions were eliminated as an adverse event?
So an adverse event that we used FDA's FAERS database, and they make the determination. So the manufacturer must report an event that occurs, that they hear about, where a consumer was injured, hospitalized, or died because of a drug. And then through the FDA's analysis of these adverse events, there are flags that are put on to the adverse event. Things like a drug characterization field. That field means that the drug is the likely cause of the event. And a D-challenge field. The D-challenge field means that if the patient was taken off the drug, the problem that's discovered went away. So we tested just the D-challenged drugs, which was very convincing for us as an author team. We're really onto something here because our effects still hold on the D-challenged drugs, on those that cause death, hospitalization, or injury. So to answer your very first question, the firm must report it when they hear about it. It's mandatory.
When the firm, who's that?
The manufacturer.
Okay.
So the manufacturer hears about adverse events from patients, from physicians, from lawyers.
But there's no obligation that a patient say it.
Correct.
There's no obligation that a hospital, and there's no obligation that a doctor.
Correct. And the order you just gave, though, the nurses and physicians are much more attuned to how the system works than patients. And so from our experience, like physicians and hospitals know that this FAERS database is there and that they need to report what they have found. But there is no obligation. There's a selection bias there. So it must be underreported. It has to be because it's not forced. But this does come back to the FDA's enforcement authority, because these reports come into firms, and these firms maintain complaint databases. And when you can access those complaint databases on an unannounced inspection, you're going to get a real honest look into how the quality of the firm is operating, versus if you give them even a week's notice, the look may not be the same.
What's the total list of adverse reactions? Do you have a list of how many?
I can get that to you. It's incredibly long.
Would it be 500,000?
I know it's in the thousands. It's a very long list.
Okay. Why do you think it's different in the United States if it's manufactured in the United States versus India or China?
So this is speculation somewhat, because in the study we were not able to get at that core mechanism. But theoretically, it makes a lot of logical sense that when you source a product in the lowest cost place, where you are furthest from the regulator, the temptation to cut corners that will affect quality just goes up and up. And then to accentuate that temptation, if quality is assumed to be high, as soon as you get FDA approval, you have that stamp of approval, you no longer have to worry about quality. And so the difference, I think, lies in the fact that in the United States, you are much closer to the FDA. Their authority is much more felt. And the costs of the suppliers and the raw materials, they're more. And as soon as you get that far away, the FDA's authority is more distant, and the cost of everything is lower, and that lower cost will come through in lower quality.
And you don't have oversight.
The oversight is much more distant. It's much more distant, and I don't envy the FDA. It's much harder to enforce their standards there.
So if I understand correctly, according to your study, generic drugs manufactured in India have a 54% higher chance of an adverse event, which hospitalization, disability, and death, compared to a similar drug made in the U.S., right?
That's correct.
So let's say you're going to buy two of anything. Let's say you're going to buy two cars. If you bought one of them, if you bought one car, you had a 54% chance of something bad happening to you. So what would you do?
Well, because cars have quality ratings like J.D. Powers, I would buy the higher quality rated car, but that can't be done in drugs. But if I knew the difference, then I would spend the money to buy the higher quality product.
Yeah. You think the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration would let a car that was 54% more dangerous on the road?
See, and the regulator, NHTSA, doesn't have to worry too much about that, because car quality is accessible to the consumer before they buy it. And that's the difference between that and the pharmaceutical industry. It's unaccessible before you buy it, and oftentimes even after you buy it. This adverse event increase is hidden in millions of adverse events. That's what makes studies like this so difficult. There's so many data points that it's easy for these types of increases to hide.
What was the FDA's reaction to your study?
So while I've worked with the FDA before, since we published that paper, I've not had a lot of interaction with the FDA. And in the last several months, some of my contacts have left. And so I don't honestly know what the FDA's reaction is.
Okay. Did your study show a difference in quality between generic drugs made in developed nations like Canada or the EU compared to India?
There is an overall difference between emerging economies and advanced economies. But when we took that difference and we broke it out by country, the only country difference was India to US. So no, there wasn't a difference between US and Canada. However, the volume of drugs in our study was overwhelmingly advanced economy drugs were US, and overwhelmingly emerging economy drugs were India. So the volume helped make the difference findable, but it was something that we didn't see when we compared like US to Canada, for instance.
So what was the landscape of generic drugs that you looked at? Did you limit it to sterile injectables, or did you try to look at everything?
We looked at everything that we could get label data on.
So statins, antibodies, antibiotics, and blood pressure medications?
All of those. Everything that had a label on the database we used, we measured it.
Okay. Why do you think the FDA doesn't require, country of origin of ingredients and country of origin of manufacturing? Why don't they do it?
So this is speculation, of course, but I believe that there's a few reasons. I have heard that through some of our discussions with them that if they were to put quality or country labeling, it could cause some unexpected market reactions. It could cause shortages, for instance, because if you look at a drug and there's
People might buy American first.
and if the supply isn't there, then all of a sudden we have overnight shortages because we've made the market transparent. That's one of the concerns I've heard. The other is that I believe, and this is speculation, that the FDA doesn't think they have the authority to force the manufacturer to put the country on there. They believe that's company confidential information. And then the quality rating is something that we've taken from data that they possess, and we've come up with a measure that we believe they could translate it to, but it's not something that's immediately available right now.
Mr. Daniels, I think you said that China supplies about 90% of antibiotic APIs consumed in the U.S. Can you talk about how you figured this out?
Yes. So what we found was that 90% of the antibiotic APIs used by India, and India being the vast majority of the generic antibiotics that we were getting, were manufactured in China. And the way that we mapped this, we took every single critical medicine that we had in our study. We built a bill of materials for each of them. So every single component of that pharmaceutical, of that drug. And what we did was once we had that bill of materials, we identified each supplier that was connected to every single one of those components. Once we identified the supplier, we knew how much of the active ingredient was in every dose, and we could see the doses that were being consumed in the United States. We mapped that up to supplier capacity, supplier volumes coming into those companies, which we have proprietary data and customs, trade, shipping, invoicing data that informs us as to what's happening between those two companies. And we could see where the next company was sourcing their key starting materials, excipients, whatever it might have been, at that next level. So we just kept tracing down the line to the facility. So we knew which facility was actually producing which chemical compounds. Once we got down to that facility, we cross-referenced the data that we had pulled through with their certification levels, their employee information, their square footage to ensure that that capacity was visible and to identify things like shadow facilities, which there certainly is a significant volume of that kind of product coming through. And then we rolled that all the way back up to the supply chain and identified that essentially these manufacturers in India were using this significant cost differential between the locally made goods and what was being made in China, and were utilizing that to accelerate and to expand margins in the goods being sent to the United States.
So are there other drugs that you're aware of that we have such acute dependency on communist China or another adversarial country?
Yeah, about 50% of our critical medicines are in that category.
So do you think this is a national security risk?
It 100% is.
So I'm a grandfather. Kids usually get ear infections and strep throat. So if China would drop our ability and limit antibiotic-related APIs from being exported, would it impact us?
Yes, you'd see at least 50% of the antibiotics that your kids have access to evaporate. In fact, the next time one of your grandchildren gets a strep throat or an ear infection, I encourage you to look at it. I bet you dollars to donuts it's made by Aurobindo, which is an Indian manufacturer using Chinese KSMs and APIs.
And so do you think this could create a public health emergency?
It almost did during COVID. I experienced it. I was working with Honorable Ellen Lord, and Jen Santos and Stacey Cummings, and when they said they were going to drown us in a sea of COVID, I mean, those calls really did happen.
And how long do you think, if they shut it off tomorrow, how long do you think our supply is for?
I mean, it's months. As Dr. Pierre Vincenzi said, it's months.
So,
but it's months. It's months with severe constraints. I mean, you'd probably be treating, you'd be treating people in sepsis. Kids would have to weather through, and that could be very dangerous.
Are there any sole source drugs, which, there was only one supplier
There are.
and they're relying on communist China or India?
There are.
Would you have,
I don't have the names off the top of my head, but I remember looking in the study, there were significant volumes.
so let me make sure I got this right. 95% of ibuprofen is imported from China.
95% of ibuprofen. So there is a key starting material that 95% of it, I believe, is
Ingredient.
pulled from China, is sourced from China. And that ingredient then goes into ibuprofen. There are other ways in which to source that same material. The same goes for acetaminophen. There are other ways to source that material, but they're not cost advantageous, and so therefore not used.
So 91% of hydrocortisone is imported from China. Does that sound right? Or
That
does it
sounds
get
right.
Ingredients?
Yeah.
Okay. So half of U.S. penicillin and heparin are imported from China? That
Yes.
sound right? So, that doesn't make any sense. So the federal government knows this and has done absolutely nothing about it.
At the moment, after COVID, there was a huge fervor. It died. We started studying the problem and stopped executing against the reshoring and strategic activities. And I'm hopeful that HHS, particularly the FDA, picks this up. But as of right now, we are not actively policing these supply chains.
Are you familiar with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act?
I am, Chairman, yes.
Do you think that's being complied with?
I do not believe we are conducting significant or thorough investigations in this pharmaceutical space. And at the beginning of the year, there was a significant drop in detentions that would indicate a lower volume of enforcement. Those have since rebounded, Chairman Scott. And I think we could significantly stiffen and significantly strengthen our policing of that law.
Have you tracked the Department of Defense reliance on China for drugs?
I have, yes.
So
Yes, sir.
do we have our own source, so our military is never dependent on China?
We do not.
Why wouldn't we?
We, in many areas, are reliant on. It's kind of like we have in critical minerals and in magnets, Chairman Scott, where the commercial markets have so deeply been usurped by China that we don't have the investment capital coming in to offset it. And so just like we're doing in MP materials and, neodymium iron boron magnets and things like that for our weapon systems, we have to make those same kind of investments in our pharmaceutical supply chains.
So if China invades Taiwan or continues to attack the sovereignty of the Philippines, and we go to their defense, do you think they'll keep shipping us drugs?
I think, Chairman Scott, it would be a key tactic to stop doing us.
Or do you think it would be safe for our military to continue taking Chinese drugs?
No, sir.
Can you explain the role that Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army linked entities play in the generic drug supply chain, and how federal programs like Medicare and Medicaid are paying for it?
Yes, Chairman Scott. So the PLA is infused into the Chinese economy. It's called the military civil fusion. And in many cases, and as we've pointed out in the Bitter Pill report, several of the organizations that are producing these active pharmaceutical ingredients or KSMs are actually sponsored and funded by PLA-funded entities or directly by the PLA. And those situations create a significant amount of command and control, what we call foreign ownership control and influence risk in those companies. and make them essentially beholden to not only the CCP but the PLA.
So would you say that the U.S. healthcare system is entirely beholden to the Communist Party of China?
At the moment, yes, sir.
Dr. Dependency, how many sole source APIs come from Communist China?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. We are aware of 11 that are directly coming from China, but that's not the real answer. The real answer is the APIs who are coming from China to India. And we know that's where 95% of our challenge is. I think antibiotics are a unique case, and it's real, and it was strategic. It was a choice in China many years ago, in fact, 15 years ago, to have that as a strategic asset, and it was successful while the world wasn't really paying attention. But that's a bit of an outlier. I think the vast majority of reliance on China is coming back to the starting materials, the chemicals, in some cases the excipients as well, less often, but in some cases.
So how many generic drugs use key starting materials from China?
We are going to have a real answer for that, but it's going to be somewhere in the range of 20 to 40% would be my guess. But give me about 2 more months and we'll have a better answer for you.
So how about brand name drugs? Do they use APIs from India or China?
Rarely, and it just goes to the different incentives. It's not that they couldn't, it's just that it's not necessary. The incentive is high-value product. We need to have a very reliable supply chain. Their finished dose is rarely in those countries. They don't want to have a big, complicated supply chain halfway around the world, so they try to simplify. And so therefore, you see the APIs manufactured mostly in US, Europe, Canada. If you think of those, that's going to be your majority. A bit more in Europe than the US in this case.
So what sort of random testing of generics drugs happen in our marketplace?
So the US market is a bit unique in the world today. There is a risk-based approach at FDA, which is taking into account known issues, and that drives testing, and FDA has its own labs and, of course, can outsource testing as well. But there's very little random testing, and currently, today, there really is no private sector solution to do so. This is relatively common practice in most markets, including in Europe, but in middle-income countries as well. It's generally called post-market surveillance, which is a fancy way to say you buy something from the pharmacy and you test it.
Does USP track how many drugs Americans are taking that rely on Chinese APIs?
Yes.
And does that present a risk to our supply chain?
Well, if you believe that China supplying our drugs is a risk, then the answer would be yes. Okay.
Okay. So how many of you would buy a generic drug made in India or China if you knew there was American-made drug available? Anybody?
So, Senator, if I'm offer,
Yep.
I would if I had the assurance on the front end of the system.
Right.
The system, as we described, is tilted today, and that's the issue. And that it's an important nuance to me because that's where the solution lies, is that untilting. And I think that's a consistency that
Right.
you hear from us.
So I think if you listen today, based on the testimony, Americans, we have hospitalizations, we have illness and death because of adverse effects from some foreign-made generic drugs. Does anybody disagree with that? So bad drug quality doesn't just mean drugs are less effective, which it could be, right? But it also make you sick or could kill you. So every American senior, see if you agree with this, every American senior needs to look into their medicine cabinet and ask this question. Am I confident that the generic drugs I'm taking are truly safe? Do you believe today they could say that? They have any ability to say that? Does any of you think they have any ability to say that today, that if they look in their medicine cabinet or they go to their pharmacy, they can say it's safe? So I talked about Leroy Hubley. Lost his wife at 48 years. Bonnie and his son Randy just weeks apart due to contaminated heparin that they need for their dialysis treatment. It's horrible. This should never happen in this country. If Americans don't know where the generic drugs they're taking are made, if there's no measurement system, there's no way they can feel confident, they can feel safe. It's clear that we have a big problem. So I'm from Florida. I was the governor. We have hurricanes. At least in hurricanes, in contrast to some other things, at least you can get out of the way, or you should. I always told people that you can rebuild a house, but you can't rebuild your life. And you told people get prepared. It seems like we're, number one, even if we didn't have the concern about the way Communist China acts, we'd say to ourselves, it's crazy that we're not focused on quality and focused on supply. But on top of that, we know that we have Communist China that is threatening Taiwan and threatening the Philippines. And why in God's green earth would we ever allow our country to be dependent, whether you're talking about anybody that takes a generic drug, including our seniors, or why would we ever put our military in that position? It just doesn't make any sense. I think the bottom line is we have no choice, but we have to make significant change. I hope the new the head of the FDA will take this seriously, and hope we'll see change. I think the way we're going to see change is by if the American public demands it. My experience as governor of Florida, my experience in this job is that if people demand it, then it's going to happen. People continue to be complacent, it's not going to happen.